Good morning, Your Excellency Mr. Jochen Plasbad, Your Excellency Mr. Georg Schutter, Mr. Dion Blanche, Ms. Jacqueline McGlade, representative of the Secretariat of the UNFCCC, co-chairs of Working Group 3, Dr. Ottmar Edenhofer, Dr. Ramon Pix-Madruga, and Dr. Yuba Sokona, Deputy Secretary of the IPCC, Mr. Gaetano Dion, distinguished delegates, members of the media, authors of Working Group 3 present on this occasion, ladies and gentlemen. Let me take this opportunity to welcome you to this 39th session of the IPCC. Berlin is a significant location for events related to climate change. I recall being here in 1995 for the first conference of the parties under the UNFCCC, which was chaired by Her Excellency Madame Angela Merkel, then Minister of Environment in this country's government. It's a great privilege for us to be here while she leads this country as Chancellor of the Republic. We are at a crucial juncture in the completion of the fifth assessment report of the IPCC. In this week, we would be considering approval and acceptance of the Working Group 3 report after successful conclusion of the Working Group 1 report in September 2013 in Stockholm, Sweden, and late last month of the Working Group 2 report in Yokohama, Japan. The importance of this Working Group 3 report can hardly be overemphasized. We are at a critical stage of discussions and negotiations under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Not only is the global community actively carrying out a review of its aspirational goal to limit temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius, but it is relying essentially on the findings of the AR5 to determine directions for the future. An important consideration in determining this direction would be the assessment of pathways by which the world can mitigate emissions of greenhouse gases as they relate to the attainment of specific targets to limit temperature increase in the future. The Working Group 1 report has clearly established the role of human action as the dominant factor in warming that has taken place since the middle of the last century. It is also assessed on the basis of observations and measurements, the extent of sea level rise, acidification of the oceans, warming of the oceans, and the nature of extreme events that have occurred in the past on account of climate change. Projections of the future clearly highlight the challenges that we face related to each of the RCPs that underlie projections of climate change in the future. The Working Group 2 report has given us substantial information on the serious impacts of climate change and how these impinge on vulnerability of specific systems and locations, as well as how they would affect global food security, the extent of poverty, and other manifestations of climate change, including those related to sea level rise, availability of water resources, the health of human society, and the conservation of biodiversity. May I reiterate what I said in Yokohama, that the impacts of climate change will leave no part of the world untouched and unaffected. It is therefore essential for us, through the completion of this Working Group 3 report, to provide knowledge and information on how to mitigate emissions of greenhouse gases. Previous assessment reports of the IPCC, including the AR4 and the assessments of Working Groups 1 and 2 as part of the AR5, clearly establish that neither adaptation nor mitigation alone can help us meet the challenge of climate change. The findings of this report are a vital part of filling up the gap in giving us a roadmap for the future. Against this background, I would urge the distinguished delegates to exercise a high level of enlightenment in discussing and approving of the Working Group 3 report. The world needs a robust, policy-relevant, and informative document, which authors have worked extremely hard to produce. I salute their dedication and talent in giving us the draft that we have before us today. In conclusion, I would like to commend the co-chairs of Working Group 3, the Technical Support Unit, all the expert reviewers and governments for the enormous contribution they have made in getting us to where we are today. It is for all of us during this week to reach a major milestone in completing work on this report for the benefit of human society and all forms of life on this planet. May I end by thanking the government of Germany for their warm hospitality and the excellent arrangements that have been made for the conduct of this session. We are very grateful to all those who have worked hard to put all the many arrangements together for creating conditions that I am sure will contribute greatly to the success of this session. Thank you very much. And with this, may I request His Excellency Mr. Jochen Flassberg, State Secretary, Federal Ministry of the Environment, Nature Conservation, Building and Nuclear Safety, to give us his statement.
Chairman of the IPCC, Professor Pachauri, co-chairs of Working Group 3, Professor Edenhofer, Dr. Piz-Madruga, and Dr. Sokona, delegates, authors of the report, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. Welcome to Berlin and to the 39th plenary session of the IPCC. It's a great pleasure for me to warmly welcome you on behalf of the Federal Environment Ministry. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no need to spell out here that climate change is a key challenge for the world community in this century, as it is not least to the IPCC that the world has recognized climate change is real, is man-made, and will tremendously change living conditions on our planet. The IPCC is a unique institution. It is a link between science on the one side and politics and society on the other side. There is hardly any other field of politics on the global level where the processing and assessment of scientific findings and then their transfer to political decision makers is based on such a comprehensive, institutionalized foundation. In many other fields of politics, decision makers would be grateful to have an independent institution such as the IPCC, an institution that manages to involve excellent scientists and in many cases the best in their respective field. An institution that guarantees that the scientists can work independently with well-defined rules and processes as when scientific findings can be considered to be reliable and how to express this in a transparent way without denying any existing uncertainties. And last but not least, an institution that enables governments to comprehend the scientific work to confirm the results and ultimately base their action on it. To be crystal clear, there are and there must not be any expectations from government with regard to the content of your findings and results. There are no favored outcomes by governments, or to put it in other words, we take what we get. What we need is the best available science in combination with a level of evidence and remaining uncertainty, and if doable, a possible range of options how to meet our climate targets. Ladies and gentlemen, with your work, you lay the scientific foundation on which future climate policy will be built, internationally and nationally. Internationally, we are facing important decisions. We must conclude a comprehensive and ambitious climate agreement in Paris at the end of 2015, in which all states commit themselves to reduction obligations as of 2020 onwards. It is only by deciding on significant emission reductions and implementing them that we can maintain the opportunity to achieve our joint target, limiting global warming by a maximum of 2 degrees by the end of this century. In order to achieve this target, the future climate agreement must meet 3 requirements. First, it must be legally binding for all states. All states have to commit themselves within the boundaries of their possibilities in the understanding of a common but differentiated responsibility. Second, it must ensure joint standards on transparency and verifiability of national efforts. And third, it must lead to the implementation of ambitious long-term strategies for climate protection, for mitigation and adaptation in all states. Ladies and gentlemen, Germany is prepared and willing to accept our responsibility. We reconfirm our ambitious climate targets and will continue to make a fair contribution to climate financing in the future. And we will also advocate for ambitious climate targets within the European Union. Our national target, as you know, of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by at least 40% as compared to 1990 by 2020. This target is part of the governmental contract of the new government that was set in place end of the last year. We even want to reduce emissions in Germany by 55% by 2030 and 80 to 95% by 2050. In parallel, we are also working towards the EU to agreeing on ambitious targets by 2030. First, an ambitious EU emission reduction target of at least 40% domestic by 2030. We deliberately leave open to be that it will be further increased in the context of an international climate agreement. Second, a target of the increased use for renewable energies, and third, an energy efficiency target. In addition, we must definitely strengthen the emissions trading theme, the ETS, in Germany, in the EU. Ladies and gentlemen, you might read in the papers these days that what we call our Energiewende in Germany is facing some difficulties. And indeed, we are far away from saying that this is an easy task. Basically, we are now in a situation where we have an increased share of more than 25% renewables in our grid, and at the same time, a remaining existing power plant park consisting out of hard coal, lignite, and remaining nuclear power plants. And in this transformation period, we have to adjust, and we will adjust our energy supply system, and from that time on, we will continue to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions. And the government remains committed to the core elements of what we call the Energiewende. First, the increased use of renewable energies, making them the major energy source in the coming decades. By 2050, our electricity supply is to be generated more or less completely on the basis of renewable energy sources. We want to considerably increase energy efficiency in our buildings, in industrial production and in transport, and we will phase out the use of nuclear energy by 2022. We are convinced that the Energiewende is a strategic decision in favor of technology leadership, competitiveness, innovations, and jobs. Already today, climate action generates more than 45 billion euro turnover in Germany's industry. There is no sector of industry which is growing faster and more dynamically in our country and in the whole world. I very much hope that the IPCC report to be adopted here in Berlin will further stimulate the development of low-carbon economies in many other countries. I hope it will create additional momentum both on the national level as on the international climate negotiations. Ladies and gentlemen, IPCC's fifth assessment report is published at the right point in time to supply the scientific foundation for decisions to be taken. You are heading for busy days and, as I heard in our discussions prior to this meeting, even in the nights. I would like to thank you all already today for your personal commitment and work. I have no doubt that at the end of the meeting next weekend, you will present a text which summarizes the scientific findings in clear words. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you very much. May I now turn to Mr. Georg Schutter, State Secretary, Federal Ministry of Education and Research in the Government of Germany, to give us his statement. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Pachauri, dear co-chairs, Professor Edenhofer, Dr. Pix-Madruga, Dr. Sokona, distinguished panelists, delegates, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome also on behalf of the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, and a warm thank you as well. Thank you for traveling to Berlin. Thank you for devoting your time and your energy to the discussions ahead of you. Let me take up some of the comments which were made earlier by presenting 4 challenges to you from a science and research policy perspective. The first one is, as Dr. Pachauri said, knowledge and information. This I would call the Tier 1 challenge. This is the amount and quality of data. Do we have enough data? What can we do to get more data? What can we do to improve the quality of the data to reach even more certainty? Certainty sometimes is discomforting, this we all know, and yet it will be more convincing the better we are. And do we have the right modeling technologies? Last year, I attended a meeting very close to here in Potsdam in which climate modelists came together to improve, on the one hand, the data quality and the transferability of data, and on the other hand, also to improve modeling technologies in order to be even better from a hard and a software point of view. So the Tier 1 challenge is information, quality of information, amount of information. The Tier 2 challenge is the knowledge realm. The underlying scientific concepts. Do we all share the same scientific concepts? Do we all share the same scholarly concepts? What do we take and bring into those concepts? What kind of cultural connotations are there? Do we speak the same language, and are we able to aggregate the data and the knowledge that is available? The Tier 3 challenge I would call the structure of scientific discourse, because also scientific discourse is culturally shaped. Do we make sure that all relevant voices are being heard? Do we make sure that all relevant opinions are being expressed? Do we make sure that they are heard and being expressed adequately? So the challenge here is the open and the relevant discourse. And the Tier 4 challenge then is the interface between science and scholarship on the one hand and the political realm on the other. We do have different political systems and different publics in the countries where we come from. Scientific messages are being expressed in various ways and are being taken up by the public in different ways through varying channels, and they are transported to, on the one hand, different political publics and different general publics on the other hand. How are the messages perceived in these publics? How does climate policy cut across other fields of policy? We just heard from Jochen Flassbart how climate policy interacts with energy policy. And we do have conflicting objectives, and it's difficult to make ends meet, not only in Germany, but also in other parts of the world. How can an energy policy be climate neutral on the one hand? How can energy be affordable to consumers on the other hand? And how do we also meet the challenge of a secure provision of energy to consumers, private consumers as well as industry and the business world? So we do have conflicting objectives, and we do have to make sure that climate policy as a cross-cutting issue, cutting across different political realms, is being integrated into those other realms of policy in the right and the adequate way. So the research challenge is to take a closer look at multivariate policy designs. We have to think about various political fields, various actors, various value systems, various systems of objectives, in order to find adequate ways how to understand these multivariate systems and how to come to political conclusions. So what does all this mean for national and international science and research policy? For one, we have to strengthen the Tier 1 research. We have to provide funding to optimize models, to optimize regional scoping, to increase the predictive power, and also we have to provide funding to develop the right technologies which will help to mitigate climate change, technologies which also provide business opportunities, of course. Environmental technologies, environmental protection technologies are a field of business activities with, I would assume, a bright future. Then we have, of course, to continue the dialogue on the Tier 2 challenge, the underlying concepts. We have to get together nationally and internationally to build a broader theoretical base of climate change knowledge. We then have to, of course, continuously improve the Tier 3 conditions, the structure of international scientific discourse. And for this reason, we, the German government, are proud to support the IPCC internationally and to also support our national actors that contribute to IPCC reports. And we have to look at national and international policy formation. What you do during this week, what you've done in the past, is to contribute to knowledge at the interface of science and policy. And we have to take a close look at this interaction. So the Tier 4 challenge is to better understand this interaction in order to make sure that the voices of science and scholarships are heard freely and adequately in the political realm. This is our challenge. This is your challenge. Thank you very much for taking it up. Thank you very much for the energy which you will devote to the coming days. We look forward to the results of your deliberations. Thank you very much.
I would now request Mr. Dion Terblanche to give us his statement on behalf of the World Meteorological Organization.
Excellency Mr. Flashbath, State Secretary, Federal Ministry of the Environment, Nature Conservation, Building and Nuclear Safety. Excellency Mr. Schutte, State Secretary, Federal Ministry of Education and Research, Dr. Pachuri, the co-chairs of Working Group 3, Dr. Spitz Madura, Eidenhofer and Sukuna, Dr. McGlade, representative of UNEP, Mr. Leone, the Deputy Secretary of the IPCC, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the World Meteorological Organization, one of the two co-sponsors of the IPCC, I wish to welcome you at this approval session of the third part of the fifth assessment report. We are meeting again only 1 week after the successful launch of the report of Working Group 2, which has provided a crucial assessment of the knowledge of climate change impacts, adaptation and vulnerability. The WMO community looks forward to the approval of this third component of the fifth assessment report, the one that offers policy makers options for mitigation policies to reduce human influence on the climate system, as clearly explained by the previous speakers. This report and the entire assessment would not have been possible without years of intense work by thousands of people. I wish to express my gratitude to the committed and dedicated scientists, including those from the WMO community, who have accomplished this major task. I am confident that the satisfaction for the completion of the report is accompanied by the pride of having contributed possible solutions to mitigate climate change. I'm also grateful to the member states of the United Nations and to our co-sponsor UNEP for the continuing support of the IPCC. Last year, the report of the Working Group 1 stated that limiting the global warming to 2 degrees rise from the levels of 1880 will require that our future emissions of carbon dioxide be dramatically lower than our past emissions. Today's report on mitigation of climate change presents what we need to do to meet this profound challenge in the context of a global population and economy that is rapidly growing. Greenhouse gases can last for decades or longer in the atmosphere, and this means that past and current emissions will continue to affect the climate for many years to come. To provide policymakers with sound scientific elements for their decision, WMO and its members monitor atmospheric concentrations of heat-trapping gases on a continuous basis. These measurements confirm that atmospheric concentrations have increased to levels unprecedented in at least the last 800,000 years. In addition to sponsoring the IPCC and coordinating international climate observations and research, WMO supports also efforts to reduce emissions. The Global Framework for Climate Services assists governments to produce and use climate information and predictions for adapting to and mitigating climate change while transforming to a green economy. While climate-sensitive sectors such as energy and agriculture both contribute to and are affected by climate change, climate services can empower decision-makers to make these sectors more climate resilient and to minimize their emissions. I should add that climate researchers, to TV and radio weather presenters, the meteorological community has a key role to play in informing policymakers and the general public about the causes and impacts of climate change. The services and predictions we provide also support efforts to adapt to new climate conditions and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. To conclude, I wish to reiterate that WMO is proud for what the IPCC stands for and for what it has delivered. More than 25 years after the establishment of the panel, we continue to believe that through scientific assessments of the highest quality, IPCC is rendering a unique service to the international community. This is why we support its work with our resources and inputs. This 39th session of the IPCC is also important for the discussions that are being held on the future of the IPCC. This is a timely and very relevant process that will lead the panel into assessment cycles with increased responsiveness to the needs, challenges, and opportunities of the world. As a co-sponsor of the IPCC, WMO welcomes this debate and look forward to be further involved. Thank you.
Could I now request Ms. Jacqueline McGlade to give us her statement on behalf of UNEP.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, colleagues, excellencies, co-chairs, ladies and gentlemen, and friends. On behalf of UNEP and as the Chief Scientist, I'm very pleased to address the 39th session of IPCC, and in particular to be that as one of the parent organizations, and to stress that UNEP really continues to support, to bring to the world's attention the findings of IPCC. The latest science cited by IPCC, I think, is conclusive. It provides evidence that human activities are causing unprecedented changes in the Earth's climate. And as many have stated, it is time to take immediate and robust action to mitigate the impacts of climate change against the risks of a greater than 2-degree temperature rise. For those who want to focus on the scientific question marks, that is their right to do so. But today, we need to focus on the fundamentals and on action. The fifth assessment report will be considered by negotiators responsible for concluding a new agreement under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. As greenhouse gas emissions continue to increase, inducing changes in the oceans, ice caps, glaciers, the biosphere, and other components of the climate system, these are likely to be very unprecedented times over decades to thousands of years, and it is clear that such a universal climate agreement by 2015 will be vital. Any agreement will need to be backed by supportive voluntary initiatives, such as those bringing down short-lived climate pollutants. And as work on the inclusive green economy and the transition to a low-carbon economy continues to show, there are multiple benefits of such immediate policy action, including improved public health, food security, and of course, job generation. There are many different pathways to reach the 2 degrees centigrade target, and the stepping stones to future emission targets will need to be clearly articulated and contextualized for each country. But as UNEP's own work has shown, should the global community not immediately embark on wide-ranging activities to narrow the greenhouse gas emissions gap, the chance of remaining on the least cost path to keep the global temperature rise below 2 degrees centigrade this century will swiftly diminish and open the door to insurmountable challenges. Not narrowing the emissions gap will mean greater lock-in of carbon-intense infrastructure, greater dependence upon often improved technologies in the medium term, and greater costs of mitigation and greater risk to many people. The stepping stone of the 2020 target can still be achieved by strengthening current pledges and by further action, including scaling up of international cooperation initiatives such as those in energy efficiency, fossil fuel subsidy reform, and renewable energy. Last week, UNEP, the International Resource Panel, and UN RED launched a new report outlining how integrating RED Plus programs into a green economy approach can help mitigate climate change while conserving and even boosting the economic and social benefits that forests provide to human society. Agriculture is also critical, as direct emissions from this sector are currently 11% of global greenhouse gas emissions, even more if indirect emissions are taken into account. The recent report of UNEP's International Resource Panel, which assessed land use, global land use, and options for sustainable land management, shows that changes in land use and land cover due to expansion of global cropland is accelerating climate change through the release of carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases, including nitrous oxide. But the report concludes that the trend can be reversed through sustainable consumption and production actions, such as adopting best management practices in agricultural production and implementation of policy instruments that address food waste and consumption. In November last year, the Climate Technology Centre and Network opened to serve the UNFCCC parties. This network represents another building block in a low-carbon future. This facility will make a substantive contribution to accelerating the use of existing and new technologies that improve the lives and livelihoods of millions of people in developing countries who are dealing with the impacts of climate change in their daily lives. And the Climate and Clean Air Coalition to Reduce Short-Lived Climate Pollutants, CCAC, celebrated its second anniversary this year. It has led the first global effort to treat short-lived climate pollutants as an urgent and collective challenge. It started with 7 partners in 2012, and today we have 80. Its rapid growth shows that this global effort to reduce emissions of black carbon, methane, and many hydrofluorocarbons has already touched numerous sectors of society in the effort to slow the global rate of warming and indirectly and directly protect human health, agriculture, and the environment. At the heart of all our activities, including those of UNEP, lies the need for assessments that are credible, transparent, relevant, and based on up-to-date knowledge. In its drive to strengthen science policy and the interface, UNEP is embarking on a wide-ranging shift towards working with all countries, especially developing countries, to expand their analytical capacity and to help make their own information and scientific knowledge more accessible across languages, more up-to-date, through a platform, a system-wide platform for the UN called UNEP Live. Our focus over the next year will be on supporting the regional environmental information networks and small island developing states. Already we've linked many of these developing countries to global services on air quality, sea level rise, temperature, and ecosystems. UNEP Live will enable the research and policy communities and data providers in developing countries to bring their inputs to the work of the panels, not only IPCC, but also IPBES and the International Resource Panel, through better access to their own knowledge repositories. Ladies and gentlemen, UNEP is very proud of what IPCC stands for and for what it has delivered. More than 25 years following the establishment of the panel, we continue to support the work of this pioneering UN initiative. And as we develop ideas about the future work of IPCC, UNEP stands ready to support its activities and ensure it has the needed capacity to respond and lead on climate change science and policy guidance. I would like to express our gratitude and to thank all of the many scientists who have contributed to Working Group 3. I wish you all success, and we look forward to the very important contributions of the Working Group to the 5th assessment. Thank you.
We now have a video-recorded message from Ms. Christiana Figueres, Executive Secretary of the Secretariat for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So could we play that message, please?
Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, I thank the government of Germany for hosting this meeting of the IPCC and its Working Group 3. And I thank the IPCC for inviting me to speak at yet another opening plenary session. I do apologize about the fact that I am again only joining you via video. I hope you will forgive me if you know that these videos are part of our own mitigation efforts. I commend the scientists who produced this third installment of the fifth assessment report on options to mitigate climate change. This report, together with the contribution of Working Group 2, completes the solution space that shows with unprecedented clarity and sound science how we can meet the climate change challenge. This final working group's contribution makes the IPCC fifth assessment report the most comprehensive and credible assessment the world has on the risks and opportunities of climate change. Working Group 3 looks at the findings of scientists and also economists, political scientists, social scientists, and now, for the first time, philosophers. It examines the real-world challenges of implementing climate policy and provides price signals regarding what these challenges mean for the economy. It even assesses the impact of the Convention and the Kyoto Protocol. This shows more clearly than ever the feasibility of various paths forward, the scope of options leading to various warming levels and their costs, benefits, and risks. Never before have we had such good information on available mitigation pathways and measures in the context of sustainable development and economic implications. This unprecedented insight is the scientific foundation for national policy and international cooperation that needs to take us closer to the goal of limiting global warming below the 2 degrees Celsius limit. AR5 will inform the negotiations among governments in many ways, illuminating the ethical considerations of international cooperation on climate change and connecting the implications of near-term mitigation action with our chances to stay under the 2 degrees Celsius. I look forward to June, when findings will be presented to governments and ministers and considered by the structured expert dialogue on the 2013 to 15 review of the 2-degree limit, all of whom depend on objective evidence to make accurate assessments. And I look forward to the Climate Summit in September and the UN Climate Conference in Lima, where I hope to see AR5 findings reflected in summit statements and national contributions currently in development. It is clear that a final and complete AR5 report infuses the climate talks with unbiased information on the problem and actionable options for solutions. As we welcome this resource to the global dialogue on effective climate response, we also know the sum total of efforts to limit warming do not add up to what is needed to bend the emissions curve. We are currently not on track to stay below the 2-degree centigrade goal, much less 1.5 degrees Celsius. We must increase our collective mitigation ambition, and clear science with a wider social perspective is a powerful instrument for policymaking. Therefore, I ask that you look at AR5 as both the end of a process that resulted in an unprecedented scientific resource and as the beginning of an era when the findings must spring from the page and come to life. I ask you to step up efforts to raise awareness and increase access to the information found in this report by policymakers who must have real-world reasons and practical pathways to act. I ask you to speak up and speak out with the objectivity, accuracy, and lack of bias that has made the IPCC the gold standard for sound science. The facts speak for themselves, but they also speak through you, the experts. We must do everything we can to help the facts point policymakers towards smarter climate policies, greater alignment of economic policy to climate objective, and an effective and ambitious climate agreement in Paris in 2015. You are already instrumental in the endeavor by virtue of the work you undertake today, but I ask you to not let your participation end here. As governments move towards a new universal climate agreement in Paris next year, the people who analyze the problem must also enable the solutions. I am confident that with AR5 as a resource and with your help, we can seize this great opportunity to secure a high probability of staying below 2 degrees warming and provide a legacy of low carbon, sustainable growth and development to future generations. Thank you and good work.
We have 3 outstanding colleagues as co-chairs of Working Group 3, and Dr. Ottmar Edenhofer would speak on behalf of all 3 of them. Ottmar.
Thank you very much, Patsy. State Secretary Jochen Flassbart, State Secretary Georg Schütte, dear Dr. Dion Terblanche, Jacqueline McGlade, dear authors, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. The Working Group 3 of IPCC has delivered its 5th assessment report to you, the panel. This is the result of a lot of work by many distinguished scholars from around the world. Since 2011, the author team has produced a succession of draft reports which were thoroughly reviewed by experts and governments. During 3 extensive review rounds, more than 38,000 comments have been collected. They were all considered by the author team and under the critical eyes of our review editors has been included. Authors and review editors involved in this process invested a lot of time and expertise, and I want to express my sincerest gratitude to their hard and fruitful work. Moreover, I wish to express my sincere thanks to the government of Germany for the funding of Working Group 3 Technical Support Unit, as well as for organizing this approval session together with the IPCC Secretariat. Distinguished delegates, the report is long, and you, as our clients with limited time, rightly demand a very concise summary. In order to make the complex material more accessible, the 16th chapter, more than 2,000 pages, including 262 diagrams, were distilled to a technical summary and then condensed by a factor of about 50 relative to the underlying report into a concise summary for policymakers. This plenary is an exercise in clarifying the key findings of this assessment and our common basis for our dialogue in the next few days is this underlying report. It is a summary for policymakers written by scientists. In Working Group 3, we often used the image of the map maker and the navigator to illustrate the division of labor between both. The scientists explore different paths to certain goals and characterize these pathways in a map. But it is the policymaker who makes the decision on which path to follow. The first 4 chapters of the report help to clarify exactly this division of labor. In chapters 1 to 4, the authors assess the many different perspectives used in the literature to analyze mitigation. By showing these different perspectives and how and why they differ, these opening chapters help to increase transparency over the many theories, concepts, and methods that are used to measure the landscape of climate change mitigation. This is very important for you, the navigator, to know, because different methods of measurement lead to different maps. As a first application of our measurement tools, authors of Chapter 5 looked into the past to draw and understand the path of the world has evolved along and why it did so. Here again, many alternative perspectives were used to display humankind's traces into the atmosphere, including cumulative emissions, emissions per geographic and economic regions, and per economic sector and gases. They show that despite mitigation efforts, anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions grew more rapidly from 2000 to 2010 than in each of the previous decades. Authors of Chapter 6 then draw a very long map into the future to explore and characterize pathways, including their costs, co-benefits, and risks that lead up to different levels of atmospheric stabilization. The literature here shows that deep cuts in greenhouse gas emissions to limit warming to 2 degrees relative to pre-industrial level remains possible, yet will entail challenging technological, economic, institutional, and behavioral change. And it is worthwhile to note that the whole report does not prescribe a specific goal. Instead, it makes the underlying requirements to achieve these goals explicit. Stabilizing greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at low levels requires mitigation throughout the economy. The literature assessed in chapters 7 to 12 greatly increases the sectoral resolution of mitigation maps. And finally, chapters 13 to 16 offer insights on policies and institutions that navigators could use to steer economies along pathways at all levels of governance. The overall conclusion is that ambitious mitigation will require policies sufficiently effective to induce fundamental shifts in investment flows. Moreover, as a global commons problem, effective climate change mitigation requires international cooperation. Distinguished delegates, choices on mitigation can be informed by insights from engineering, natural science, and social sciences, including decision theory. Climate policy not only involves scientific facts, but also raises many issues of ethics concerned with the development of human well-being, with the protection of cultural and natural values, with equity, fairness, justice, and rights among countries and individuals. This is why it was the aim of Working Group 3 within the 5th assessment cycle to deliver a robust mitigation map that informs the navigator about the implication of alternative pathways, each with its own bundle of trade-offs, while clearly making implied value assumptions and uncertainties involve the making of maps. The aim was to be policy relevant without being policy prescriptive. And condensing, communicating, and clarifying such multidimensional findings poses a challenge at least as great as producing them. The author team and the technical support unit, my co-chair colleagues, Ramon Pitsch and Yuba Sokona and myself, were all excited to finally meet you here in Berlin and to complete the task that you have given us 6 years ago. It is our collective assignment to produce and to approve a summary for policymakers that represents these findings in the possible most relevant and simple way. I wish all of us open and constructive discussions, patience with each other, and strong coffee during the breaks, in particular in the nights. Thanks a lot.
Well, with that promise of strong coffee and possibly something stronger, we will suspend the session for 10 minutes so that the dignitaries over here, as well as members of the media, can depart. And I'll resume this session in about 10 minutes from now. Thank you very much.